This webinar will really be a review of our recently released position statement on HVAC&R licensing in Australia, developed by AIRAH's Refrigeration Special Technical Group. Today joining us, we have Brett Hedge and Jonathan Hare, who are the co-chairs of the Refrigeration STG. We'll be discussing the statement, opening it up to questions and comments from the audience, and really seeking and asking industry to provide feedback via the website. The way that today's webinar will run will be, we've pre-recorded a short video demonstration, but we're really after feedback from industry, comments from industry, so we can continue to update, monitor and change our position statement. I'd like to first of all thank Brett and Jonathan for their time and their availability this afternoon, and we will get underway right now. So I'll just ask my colleague Marie to open up the video and begin the start of the webinar. Marie.
Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to the webinar today. We're going to discuss AIRAH's new position statement on HVAC&R licensing now and moving forward to the future. Presenting with me today is my co-chair of Refrigeration Special Technical Group, Brett Hedge, Sales and Marketing Manager in Kirby. My name is Jonathan Hare, Refrigeration Engineer, CA Group Services. As we know, HVAC&R serves everyone, everywhere, from residential to commercial, all the way through to industrial industries all throughout the country. There's some facts here, as you can see from Cold Hard Facts 3, which show how big the industry actually is. Over 56 million pieces of equipment, 2.3% of GDP, 24% of generated electricity, 13% of national greenhouse gas emissions, nearly 300,000 employees. Will play a vital role in achieving Australia's climate goals. AIRAH has commitments on several international agreements, including the Paris Agreement, which says we will reduce our emissions to 26.8% below 2005 levels by 2030. It's also privy to the Kigali Protocol, which reduces the bulk import of HFCs by 85% by 2036. This means that high GWP HFCs will be first to disappear, with the lower GWP HFCs to follow. The challenge here is the safe transition to low GWP refrigerants to meet these targets. It's also the effective management and reduction of our CO2 emissions. This can be shown on the right in the pie chart, which includes the 85%, the majority of indirect emissions. Indirect emissions are the largest. They are exacerbated by poor installation and maintenance, insufficient refrigerants, etc. There are deficiencies in our sector in terms of knowledge, skills, licensing, and compliance that will hamper the HFC phase down and emissions reductions efforts, and that are essential to the long-term resourcing of our sector.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I'll talk through the licensing system that we have today for the refrigeration air conditioning trade. What we have is a partial licensing system that just covers synthetic refrigerant handling. It does not truly provide a credible position for consumer awareness or promote or reinforce the skills and work standards that are required for refrigeration air conditioning systems and the work that technicians carried out. The everyday consumer does have very little understanding of the trade certificate that is required to maintain, service and install refrigeration and air conditioning systems. And without a trade license, the assurance of workmanship is lost, and ultimately therefore is potential for substandard work to be carried out. Our current licensing regime, the Arctic license, covers numbers of sectors so that work can be completed efficiently and effectively across The introduction of a Cert 2 licence, whilst good for consumers, does not assist with the growing skill shortage or the qualified technicians that are available to commission, service and maintain equipment. Whilst there are 77,000 licences in the country for handling refrigerant, only 1/3 of these, or less than 1/3 of these, belong to fully qualified HVAC&R technicians. If we look at the numbers more closely, you'll see the breakdown with automotive air conditioning actually at higher numbers than the stationary RAC, which is the group that is responsible for maintaining, servicing and installing all refrigeration and air conditioning systems. This number is not growing at the rate required to maintain service in the Australian marketplace, as air conditioning systems installation base increases year over year. When we talk about the skill recognition, a Cert 2 licence only allows basic RAC system installation. The challenge with this is being that it is the highest component of industry volume, where work is being done, where systems are being installed, but it stops at the installation. There is no requirement for the commissioning, servicing, or maintenance of those systems downstream in a Cert 2 licence, which unfortunately means a Cert 2 qualified technician is unable to maintain or diagnose faults in an installation, and back to the original point, allows for the subpar installation of equipment and potential losses in refrigerant, which increase synthetic greenhouse gas emissions. Looking at the skills gap with more detail, the ARC licence provides for the ability to handle synthetic greenhouse gases. The two qualifications for RAC systems are Cert 2 with 360 hours of training versus a Cert 3 licence, which requires over 1,000 hours of training for qualification. To the end user, there is little difference in understanding what this actually is. Cert 3 qualified technicians can service, maintain and install. Cert 2 can only install systems. The other challenge with the current Arctic licence, it is not comprehensive. It only manages the handling of synthetic greenhouse gases. It does not consider new and emerging technologies such as natural refrigerants and refrigerants with lower GWP that also have issues around flammability and the handling of these refrigerants. Under the current licensing scheme, there's also no recognition for continued professional development or continued learning. And this does not allow technicians to keep pace with the developing technologies or new refrigerants. And this has been an issue over the last 10 years with refrigerant introductions such as R32. The lack of true trade licensing system provides consumers little assurance and guarantees that there will be a skills gap that continues, and we will not address the base systems that is required for a Cert 3 licence to be the main licence that's used in our industry. Now I'll hand it back to Jonathan. Thank you.
AIRAH's position on refrigeration licensing. AIRAH supports the transition of low GWP refrigerants and HFC phase zone being coordinated by the department. They support a nationally harmonised approach to licensing. This covers all refrigerants based on minimum standards of competency in sector of operation. It could include a separate contractor business license required, supported by ongoing activities to ensure compliance, including education, monitoring, and particularly enforcement of these regulations. It supports the comprehensive approach to training and continuing education. The Cert 3 should be the minimum qualification for professionals installing, commissioning, maintaining, and decommissioning these systems, which is a very clear statement that we're putting forward. AIRAH supports the development of pathways to bridge the skills gap, the processes for assessing relevant industry experience, officially recognising this in the form of A2F, continuing professional development, mutual recognition between states, transition periods into the new system to avoid skill shortages. AIRAH will continue to support ongoing safety training and education and awareness within the industry. So next steps. Next steps will be, we'll share the position statement with all the stakeholders within the industry as our starting point. We'll gather information. We'll use the statement to advocate with regulators and government. So sharing this position statement will be other HVAC&R associations, membership bodies, members, industry professionals, people listening today. This really is to gather some quantitative data, statistics, so that we can put forward real numbers of backing to this statement, so that we can move forward and get some real change happening. What you can do, you can have your say. We would love to hear everyone's detailed feedback on this position statement. You can download the full statement on the website provided, and there'll be a survey there that you can provide feedback on specific parts of the position paper, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for AIRAH for hosting this webinar. Thanks, Brett, for co-hosting, and love to hear from you guys soon. Thanks.
I'd like to now open it up to the people who have joined us to type in any questions or comments that you may have. Obviously, we encourage everyone to visit that web page, which we will also send in a thank you email, and complete the survey. Part of this is probably the first step in a long road to really really progressing and enhancing this position statement. And if the team really can't answer the questions in this forum, in this webinar today, we will obviously jot them down and come up with a response as soon as possible. But it's really open to anyone, all industry, to ask questions of what you think. And yeah, if there are any questions, please type them in to the chat box. So down the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box, and we'd love you to put some feedback and ask Brett and Jonathan where they stand. Okay, we have got our first question. So Jonathan and Brett, I might get you to unmute your microphones. As we know, the Cert 2 are working from outside their scope, and ARC are unable to do anything about this. Guys, can we have a response to the question from JVich, all panelists at 12:44?
Hi, Brendan and all participants. Thanks for joining today. I hope you can hear me well. First time checking my voice. I'll take a nod from you, Brendan.
Yep.
To answer the question that just came through, I guess that is the purpose of the advocacy position from AIRAH. I can see a name of Vich, but I'm not sure first name to call you by. But the advocacy position is hopefully going to make industry bodies and the government more aware about the gap in the licensing. And as you rightly point out, electricians are very much a part of that. And there is efforts that are made to make sure that electricians are part of every air conditioning installation. Unfortunately, that's not apparent for refrigeration and air conditioning technicians. And that is absolutely one of the goals here, that we want the right level of qualification involved in all aspects of refrigeration, air conditioning, installation and servicing. So that's what the advocacy position is about.
Thanks, Brett. Vich, I hope that answered. Feel free to drop us a quick response. Now,
I would say too, Brendan, I'm just going to step in there too, that just to put it out there, that this position statement really is the first step of a very long road. It's not the final licensing structure that we're going to have. It's a statement to all stakeholders, and particularly to government, to say there's an issue that needs to be solved. and right now is the very start at which we're trying to get feedback to everyone to try and solve these issues, like the fact that that there isn't enough data on Cert 2 people working outside their scopes. The fact that we don't have that data is a thing that we need to find out, and all these things that we need to find out and quantify. Very importantly, we need to quantify it. Those are the things that this position statement is trying to bring to the fore. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Jonathan. Brett and Jonathan, I think I know the answer to this, but Rod has asked the question, is it AIRAH's position to support a single national licence or a state-by-state licence?
Again, this is the starting point. We're not here to say this is the way and this is the only way you can do it and there's no other way to do it. What we're trying to do is put it out there that changes need to be made, like big structural changes in the industry. And right now we're at the starting point of finding out what's the best case scenario for that. Obviously, a single national license would be awesome, but we all know how government works. We all know how dealing with the governments and territories works. So we're going to try and find the best case scenario for getting this skills-based licensing up on board.
Yeah. And look, as I've stated, this is a journey. This isn't AIRAH drawing a line in the sand and say, that's it. We are asking for industry and our members to provide comment and feedback to this so we can continually monitor and update this position statement so that we keep strengthening it and be agile enough and flexible enough to meet the needs of industry. Another question, gentlemen. One of the other questions was what would we recommend as a stopgap measure in training until upgraded training systems are developed? And that was from Michael Robinson.
It's a tough one, the training versus the licensing. I've always thought training as a bit cart before the horse, but also I've also made it known to a few people that training is one thing we can control. The government have made it pretty clear that without this sort of whole of industry approach pushing for a different licensing structure, they're not going to do anything on their own. I think training is probably something that we could push for change now and then have the licensing structure to follow. But in terms of what that looks like, I would say that needs to come from the training bodies, from the teachers group.
Yeah, and following up from that, Jonathan and Brett, David's asked about trade professional development, and obviously that is part of the position statement, is that ongoing professional development, especially with the range of changes around new technologies, new refrigerants, as you mentioned in that video. Who would we see implementing such a process? Look.
At this stage, we're going to focus on Cert 3 as a minimum for skills licensing, but for professional development, that could be through industry bodies like AIRAH, and I would see that's where they would step in to take care of that role. Obviously, the TAFEs could probably step into that role as well, but yeah, what are your thoughts, Brett?
Yeah, I think I'd follow your line of thinking, Jonathan. We need to start somewhere, and look, I think one absolute thing is that there's a little bit of a lack of understanding about what continued development options there are out there. I mentioned the green scheme as part of the discussion. was put up, and there are three key aspects to that can be done as post-trade learning that qualify as an additional ARC license. We don't have the numbers on those, but I don't think the uptake of those additional licenses have been strong in any way. So there needs to be an awareness and a push on the ability to develop even further. And AIRAH would be in a position to support design engineering piece, but from a trade licensing point of view, I think we need to start with the basis that we have for ARC at the moment, which is the Cert 3 license.
I would say too, Brendan, just as well on that one, in terms of starting that process, it's a little bit tough, particularly dealing with the likes of AIRAH and even to a greater degree the TAFEs, in the sense that because the licensing structure isn't there to attach such a professional development, it's sort of cart before the horse. And this is what I was saying before. They can develop there's no demand there from industry as yet that we know of. No call for professional development. Therefore, the likes of AIRAH and the TAFE systems can't exactly put a business model together to develop those professional development courses. So this is where, again, the feedback on this position statement, getting some real data on people saying, yes, this is what we want, that helps develop those sort of business cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And another comment or question was from Damien, just about would it not be better to target a Cert 4 license? I think the way Jonathan and Brett have outlined it is this is the start of the journey, and we are concentrating on the Cert 3 initially. So I just thought, Damien, I'd put that in just so you know that I haven't forgotten your comment. But look, we will obviously look at all these comments after the conclusion of today's webinar, and we take this feedback seriously and on board. A bit further on, Brett and Jonathan, if you're looking at your comments, I've got a bit of a statement from Rod. I'm assuming that's Rod Cummings from ARC. That ARC has found that 98% of complaints of Cert 2 restricted split license working beyond the scope are unproven. ARC welcome all complaints in this regard. I just thought I'd pass on that comment for those not watching the Q&A, sort of the chat area, but I just thought I'd pass that on.
And that's one of the biggest things here, Brendan, is that that 90% are unproven. The data simply isn't there, and there's no mechanism there to chase up each and every one. And that's part of this position,
Yeah. I've also just got a comment from Chris from Veolia. They support the position, and they'd like to see HFO refrigerants included in current licensing. A bit further down, a comment from Jason. The Cert 2 has its place if supervised correctly. So I have one employee who uses this. It works for him and also for us. How will this impact him in the short term?
Yeah, I think the advocacy position doesn't change the Cert 2 position. I think quite rightly that there is a need, and as I pointed out, it's an important thing for the consumer, the ability to install systems en masse through a broader scope of the network. The unfortunate thing is it means that there's less investment and less ability for trade license qualified technicians to make money. So there's definitely a place for Cert 2, but what we're not seeing enough of is the investment in Cert 3 technicians, which is the long-term game that we're trying to make sure is supported. And there is a trade practice that does support that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brett. Another comment from David. With the license, do we need the skill check every 2 to 3 years? I just thought I'd throw that in.
I think that comes back into this whole discussion around the professional development, and and having a skills basis to the license is the first step to do that. And whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, that's up in the air to be discussed within, you know, the people in the industry. But I would say yes, it needs to be checked and it needs to be updated.
Yeah. I've also got another comment again from Rod, who just said providing additional skills in an evolving market is critical. The first step is the green scheme. However, to support proper transition, government support is necessary. So, look, appreciate you continuing, Rod, giving us extra information. Gents, I might get you to read Dario's instead of me reading a really, really long question and comment. I might get you to just have a little bit of a read of Dario's comment, if you can see it. And maybe assess with addressing that.
Yeah, in principle, Dario, and I think Brendan's going to make the presentation available after we close this chat. In principle, to answer that question, part of the advocacy position is to have a harmonised licence that looks at the aspects of all servicing installation of all refrigeration and air conditioning system, which steps outside the ARC jurisdiction today of the synthetic greenhouse gases. So, taking your question on board, and you might not have heard the discussion points earlier around this is the starting point. We need to look at a way that we can get all aspects covered under a single licensing scheme. So,
thanks for
that answers the question, Dario, but it is a key point.
Yeah, I think that it's more once the licensing structure is based on skills, and certainly moving those flammable refrigerants, and I'd like to say all the naturals need to come into the Cert 3 fold. But once all that moves in under the Cert 3 banner, and it's a skills-based license that's checked before the license is issued, I would have thought that would certainly protect the end user's liability.
There is one other thing, Dario, that in the ARC Green scheme, the three areas that you reference are recognised as part of the additional training that can be added to an ARC licence. So there is a way to get there, and there is the training available to support those three areas as a minimum requirement of expectation. It's about the enforcement and making sure that someone has those extra ticks on their licence, essentially, on the existing system that is in place.
Just to follow up from that, Brett and Jonathan, Dario's just responded. Thanks for the response. What are we looking at in terms of the existing text with a Cert 3? But what about the existing text with a Cert 3? Do we need to get them to go back to an RTO for training?
Well, the additional green scheme items, that's a yes, but they are unit courses. So if they've completed the unit of competency, as I understand it, they can have it added to their existing licence. So for CO2 training, if they've done the TAFE course, they can get the green scheme accreditation for that particular unit of competency.
Yeah.
We're also looking at different options, as we said at the start. This is the beginning of a long journey in terms of finding the best case scenario for licensing. But one of the big topics is a tiered structure that would incorporate professional development and what sort of levels that you've actually achieved. That would include all those RTO courses that the green scheme take into account, and then that would also sort of account for upskilling and people needing to go back perhaps to just get the next level if they so deem that they need it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Jonathan. We've actually had another question, and this is probably a good one for the STG to have a bit of a discussion on. Nazmul has asked via the Q&A section, not the chat section, but is there a current international model that AIRAH have looked into and is proposing to model AQF2 in terms of licensing and education?
Jonathan, I know you've had some discussions with some others around that. I can't speak on that front. I haven't looked into anything myself. We are ideally trying to work with something that is in place with other like trades in Australia, so electricians, plumbers, and the existing licensing scheme we have. That's the ideal position.
I think the short answer is yes and no. It's sort of, we are looking at international types of AQF to model it after, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of stakeholders in that sort of training and space that we have to work with, and it'll be about sort of herding the cats, to say, in terms of getting all that lined up to any sort of international models versus trying to change what we currently have into what we think is the best.
Yeah, and that leads on to the follow-up question from Nazmul, who said, have we looked at a transitional arrangement for the current situation to the proposed framework? I'd be comfortable saying that, Nazmul, this is the first step in many, and obviously then taking this position statement to government and other bodies to try to strengthen the position for the industry before proposing a transitional arrangement. This is really trying to put a line in the sand to say we as an industry need to do better. Jonathan and Brett, do you have any other sort of comments on, like, I think we're a little way off what a transitional arrangement would look like into getting everyone to this?
Yeah, look, we need to find out exactly where we're going first before we can work out the transition. And I think with the position statement now ticked off from AIRAH's point of view, now is the time to start discussing this with, you know, all the stakeholders, all the members, anyone in the industry, and all the industry bodies, just to make sure we have everyone on board before we start promoting this to the higher ups or government. So yeah, once we sort of get some backing from the wider industry for an end goal, then we can work on a transitional framework.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Rod's just also just commented that the green scheme does not apply to Cert 2. You need a full Cert 3 rack license for the green scheme. So I just thought I'd add in that comment. And there's another question. Doing a license post-trade will have a financial effect. Most tradespeople will find out that they will not be eligible for funding as they have already completed their Cert 3. Do we have something in mind to assist tradespeople in financing a possible mandatory license?
At this stage, we haven't looked at anything from that perspective yet. We have to work out, as I said before, on the transition. We sort of have to need to know what the end goal is to work out what financial impacts there might be. Yeah, that's still to be determined.
Yeah, and a comment from David, or a question from David. Will AIRAH look at developing a roadmap to put out to industry?
That's a yes. We're already working on that roadmap at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah, the only other thing to cover off on the question for the mandatory license, I think it's important to point out that we are looking at starting at Cert 3 and nothing additional for a license at this point in time.
Yeah, Brett, your volume just dipped out there again. Can you just repeat that statement?
So in regards to a mandatory license, we're not intending or promoting the need for a change from Cert 3, where we are promoting that Cert 3 be the minimum requirement to hold a full license, and that full license is recognised by people that would be calling on the services of refrigeration and air conditioning trade.
Yeah.
Anything over and above that in terms of license staging or license structure would have to be over and above.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Brett and Jonathan. Greg's just commented, I agree we need to know where we are transitioning to before we develop a transitioning strategy. So, yeah, look, appreciate the comment, Greg. Is there any other questions? I know I've just asked you all to type quickly, but while I'm waiting, look, this is an ongoing piece of work. This isn't just going to finish with this webinar. I know Brett, Jonathan, and the team behind the scenes have done a fantastic job in getting this initial position statement out. And we are asking that the people who attended and those who weren't able to attend, we'll continue to advertise this. We are seeking industry feedback via the online survey. I'd also recommend if you can share it with colleagues, co-workers. We want this to be a positive step forward, to have some really decent discussions on how we can lift the standard of the HVAC&R industry. Gents, by the looks of it, I haven't had any other questions. So did you have any last comments before I wind things up?
I would just say that, yeah, it really is about, there's been a lot of discussions for many years about the license structure and the licensing arrangement, and that it's always fallen short of actually getting data or pulling the industry together. And I think what we need to do now is just try and share this as much as possible, get as many surveys filled out from as many people as possible, get feedback from as many people as possible, just so we can start to gather real data to present. That's always been the stopping point in the past. So that's what we're trying to get around now.
Yeah. Okay. Brett, any last comments or?
No, just thanks to yourself for hosting today and setting it up, Brendan. It's been very productive. Thank you, and thanks for everyone attending.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys.
Brett and Jonathan, thank you very much for being available today. If anyone has any questions, please contact us via the probably the best at the moment is the AIRAH@airah.org.au email. But yeah, really appreciating everyone jumping online today. AIRAH will obviously be holding more and more online webinars due to the current world climate at the moment with the COVID-19 disaster. But please look out. We will continue to promote this position statement, and we do require industry's feedback. So we'll do a follow-up email. If you can spend a few minutes, please, putting down your thoughts, that would be much appreciated. And again, thank you all for joining today, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thank you very much for coming. Brett and Jonathan, thank you so much.